Good morning, good afternoon, Valerie.
Good afternoon.
Good, welcome. You are here.
Thank you. Yeah,
Okay.
welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon and good morning, colleagues, depending on where you are. Can you hear me well? Salut.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we'll start now because we have another webinar starting at 4 p.m. and we need to finish on time. So I just want to welcome everyone once again for the second virtual knowledge sharing webinar on teachers and school reopening. I think on this one, we wanted to be a little bit forward looking. That's why we have the theme teachers and school reopening. It's jointly organized by ICPA and the section of teachers education and development. My name is Biniam Sisai, and I will be your moderator for this session. And I'm a program officer for teacher education and curriculum development in ICPA. Basically, my role will be mainly to keep time and to make sure that we are moving from one of the presentations into the other. And then I will give for the presenters, notice about the time. And we have, at a later stage, we have a question and answer session. Those of you who have questions and comments, please put them on the chat box. And our colleague, Mamdou Lamin Sow, will select some of the questions and we'll have a discussion at a later stage. And those of you who are not speaking, please unmute when you don't speak. So I want to welcome you once again and invite Dr. Yumiko Yokozuki, Director of ICPA, for a welcoming remark. Yumiko, over to you.
Okay.
We can't hear you, Yumiko.
Sorry. Now you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Good morning, good afternoon, bonjour, colleagues from Africa. So this is our second virtual knowledge sharing webinar on teachers in Africa, and we are looking at a school reopening. I think teachers play extremely important roles in when the school's reopening, not only for academic, but also for psychosocial, emotional support. We would like to rebuild better. We would like to rebuild more strongly, and we are going to look at what teachers can do and what support we can provide. So the objectives are two for this sessions to enable participants, ourselves, who are members of community of practice, to take ownership of the various tools developed by UNESCO to assist countries in reopening schools, including the framework of reopening schools and draft guidance for teachers in school reopening. And secondly, to create the platform to exchange best practices and promising approaches and strategies, as well as any complementary tools that we could develop to make our task easier. For instance, advocacy tools, experts, TORs, the competency, complementary study and official communication, and so on. We also would like to make sure that teachers' voices are reflected in our work. So, again, welcome. I'm personally really looking forward to learning from all of you in this session. Over to you, Binyam. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yumiko, for the welcoming remarks. And without further ado, I wanted to invite our colleague Valerie from the teacher section at the headquarters to briefly introduce school reopening workshop and the community of practice. 3 minutes, Valerie, over to you.
Thank you, Binyam, and thank you, Yumiko, for setting the scene. I would like to really thank Igba, who has collaborated with TED for organizing today's workshop. I will also like to thank colleagues who are here today. The invitations went out quite late, but you are many here today, so that's fine. That's great. I would like also to thank a WHO colleague who accepted to join us and to brief us a bit on the health aspect. I would also like to thank TTF colleague who is Peter Wallet, who will be presenting together with Sonia. School reopening is, as Yumiko said, the next agenda. All colleagues in the regions are called to work on that aspect to support member states. There have been several webinars organized in different regions. In Latin America, there was one yesterday. In the Arab region, there was one this morning. These webinars were for member states. In discussion with Igba, we decided that we needed one for staff so that we have a full ownership of the different tools that are produced, that exist within the organization, but also to help us think strategically how we position ourselves, how we can develop tools that will support us in each our locations to better accompany member states in developing their school reopening strategies. Today, from TED, I am here, me, Valerie, but also I am with other colleagues, Sonia from TED, Diane from TED, and also Angela, who is working with us. So we are happy to be here with you today, and the session has been organized so that we have first a focus on the health aspect with WHO. Then we have a presentation, a series of presentation of different tools. The one developed in collaboration with UNICEF and the World Bank. Another one which is currently being developed by UNESCO and the Teacher Task Force. And we will also have a presentation from a education planner's perspective, which will be presented by one of our colleagues based in Burkina Faso. And the last thing will be a presentation by Angela, who works with me on the community of practice. We'll present all the tools, all the other tools that exist. And this will be a good start for a discussion of what we have, how we can use it better, and what we miss. With this, I think I've said all I had to say, and I will give back the floor to Binyam. Thank you, Binyam.
Thank you so much, Valerie, for setting the scene and for introducing the program. I now would like to move to Dr. Shalini Desai of the World Health Organization. A special welcome to you, Dr. Shalini. Over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very, very much for the invitation to come and speak to you. And Binyam, thank you for the kind introduction. So my session is supposed to last approximately 10 minutes. We're going to talk about COVID-19 in schools, disease and health dimensions. So let me just make sure. I don't know why my screen is not moving. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
I'm not able to get it. Hang on one second. Let me just try it one more time, and I'll see if I can reshare it, and maybe that will fix my problem. Let me see. There we go. Okay.
Yes.
So that's great. Thank you so much for letting me know. So in the next 10 minutes or so, we don't have a lot of time. What I'm hoping to do is go through some basic epidemiology of COVID-19, talk about transmission and public health measures that we can take. And then I understood from the organizing committee that there were some questions specifically around immunity passports. And in order to understand that, testing is something that we need to touch upon. At the end, I've provided a few resources that you may find helpful or interesting. There's also some frequently asked questions. As you can probably well imagine, each of these topic areas could be a full 1-hour seminar in and of themselves, and I'm trying to compress them all in 10 minutes, so bear with me. So this is a graph that shows the number of new cases by day by WHO region for the past 1 month. My intent for showing this to you is that every region in the world is affected by COVID-19. And as you can see, at least right now, it is not going anywhere. So we're going to have to figure out how to continue with our lives and, for example, continuing schooling, because obviously that is really important for our young learners. So let's start off with the epidemiology of the disease, because it's nice to know the numbers, but what we really care about is who is it that's getting infected. And so if you start off at the pie diagram that I have, you'll see that less than 3% of our cases, these are the cases that are reported to WHO as of May 4th, less than 3% of cases are in children under the age of 18. So then you say, well, geez, like who else is being infected? And you can see that the majority of our cases are actually in adults. But we're talking about schools. And so while student safety, of course, is important, those students go to school with a whole bunch of adults, with a whole bunch of teachers and administrative staff, as well as support staff. And most of those individuals are also going to be at risk. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Okay. So in order to understand the kinds of things that we can do to limit transmission, we need to understand transmission to begin with. So we have a person at the top here who's infected with coronavirus, okay? The way that they can spread coronavirus is what we call respiratory droplet. What that means is that in the little bits of saliva that come out of our mouth or nose when we're coughing, when we're sneezing, when we're speaking, those can have virus. And that is what gets passed on to other people and results in more infections. So we believe that for each person that's infected, they're able to infect 2 to 3 additional people, right? So they may expose many more people, but typically they infect 2 to 3. Okay, so those 2 to 3 people then have a period of time in which they actually don't know that anything's wrong with them because the virus is inside and it's what we call an incubation period. But essentially it allows the virus opportunity to replicate, to make more copies of itself. That period, the median for that is 4 to 5 days. The range is 1 to 14 days. After that period, people go on to develop disease. 80% will have mild to moderate disease. 20% will have severe or critical disease. Okay, we're going to pause here for just 1 second because really what we care about is when are they infectious, right? Because it's one thing to have the virus and it's another thing to have the disease, but what we really want to understand is when are they infectious. I should have actually caveated all of this with, please understand that we are in the process of learning about this virus at the same time that we're trying to respond to it. Because if you think back to January, we barely knew very much about this virus at all. So this is all being updated and reviewed as we learn things. As you'll see, the bottom of my slide, this is based on literature reviews that were done earlier. Okay, so when do we think that individuals are infectious? Well, we think it's right around the time of symptom onset. And if you think back to how the virus is spread, right, we talked about those respiratory droplets, cough would be a major way for it to spread. Okay. Then those individuals that develop disease, after they recover, they become green. They have developed antibodies. And that means that they have a degree of immunity. The challenge is, right now, we don't know how long those antibodies last for, nor do we know the quality of those antibodies. Okay, so now let's think about the school setting. So all around the world, schools in a whole bunch of different countries have been closed. The reason they were closed was based on our original assumption that coronavirus transmission would be similar to influenza. In influenza, children are the major drivers for transmission. And so in influenza outbreaks, if you can reduce the number of social contacts between students, you can interrupt transmission. The role of transmission of children in COVID-19 is unclear. There's very few studies involving institutional settings, and the data that there is shows that there's little transmission in school settings. The transmission that did occur in the studies that I have listed below really related to social events linked to school or university life rather than transmission within classrooms. So we talked about transmission, and at the beginning, I told you that there's some things that we can do in order to reduce transmission. So let's talk about those public health measures. These measures should be done in combination. Personal protective measures, so those would be things like washing your hands, covering your face when you sneeze or when you cough, using a tissue for that or the crook of your elbow. Environmental measures like cleaning surfaces and places that are touched often, for example, door handles. Physical distancing measures in school settings, we can talk about things like putting desks maybe greater than 1 meter apart, or considering having school and lessons taught outside. Travel-related measures, so for example, having the start time for schools and the stop time for schools staggered, having breaks staggered, having how we travel to and from school, thinking through that process so that we can try and reduce our exposures to other individuals. WHO recommends that all suspected cases be identified, tested, isolated, and cared for, and that their contacts are identified, traced, and quarantined. So I'm
2 more minutes, Shalini.
I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes talking about the specifics around contacts and what we do there. So for contact tracing, the purpose is to break your chains of transmission. Okay, you've seen the graphic on the right-hand side before. For COVID-19, what we need to be able to do is identify people who have been exposed, right? So not just the 3 people that are going to go on and go on to have disease, but all those people that were exposed, because we don't know who those 3 people are. Then we need to quarantine them and follow them for a total of 14 days. And usually public health does this. We wouldn't expect schools to do this. Schools may be helpful in identifying people, but that would sort of be the extent of it. We wouldn't expect you to quarantine. And the goal of all of this is to prevent onward transmission, right? We're trying to avoid people from getting disease. So Sonia had mentioned that individuals had asked questions about immunity passports. In order to understand immunity passports, I need to talk a little bit about testing. So we're going to walk through this slowly. The x-axis
Dr. Shalini,
here.
could you please wrap up? Excuse me for interrupting.
Yeah, I'm fine. If you're good not hearing about immunity passports, I'm good with that.
No, it's just you can take 1 or 2 minutes to wrap up. Thank you very much. Sorry for that.
Sure. So in summary, COVID can infect children. The illness in children is usually mild. Children seem less likely to transmit infection, and there's a number of public health measures that can help decrease transmission. Contact tracing is another tool that can be used to decrease transmission. As far as testing, we still have a lot to learn, and research is ongoing to help further inform data so that we have best practices. Finally, here's some additional resources available through WHO. I understand that UNESCO also has measures as well as UNICEF and others. So I offer these to you, but understand that you may use others as well.
Thank you so much, Alini, for this very insightful and rich presentation to help us understand the health and COVID-19 dimensions and some of the lessons that we have learned. Thank you very much. I know you will be, you have another meeting after 30 minutes, but hopefully you will stay with us for some of the questions and comments later on. Thank you once again.
No problem. Thank you. I will have to leave, but you're right. I will stay for the next 30 minutes or so. Thank you.
Thank you very much once again. Without further ado, colleagues, now I wanted to move to the section where we're going to have presentations on teachers and the school reopening and some of the tools that we have by UNESCO and other partners to support countries. So I wanted to invite Sonia to introduce us for the framework for school opening. Sonia, over to you.
Hi, colleagues. I hope you can hear me. While I start, can you put my slides up? I want to thank Dr. Desai for giving us the introduction, and perhaps we can ask about more specific medical questions later after the presentations, if she is still around. So I won't take up too much time while my slides, or am I supposed to be putting up my own slides, colleagues?
Henok will help us to put. Henok, can you please upload the presentation by Sonia?
Thank you. I will start simply by saying that the framework, I do not have much time to go through it. It was a collaborative piece of work. You can go on to the next slide. It was a collaborative piece of work among UNESCO, UNICEF, World Bank, and the World Food Program. You can actually move 2 slides forward. Oh, maybe I could. Have the slides moved?
Yeah,
Yes.
they are moved. Yes.
Yes, they are
Okay.
moved.
Perfect. So you're on the slide that says when, where, and which schools to open.
Yes.
So the idea basically is that what the framework is recommending is that countries will need to take a risk-benefit analysis in deciding when schools will need to when schools can reopen. And the idea is the pictures that you see there show how along a vertical dimension and a horizontal dimension there are questions that could be considered. One major group of questions has to do with the benefits of the classroom-based instruction over the remote learning. So here you would want to consider instances where we were just talking previously about how the children might not be as sick, but they could transmit to adults. And so if we're talking about very little children, we would have to consider the risk of the adults who are the teachers who are in the classroom and how capable little children will be to sustain learning. At the same time, we have to consider children who are not in contexts where they will have access to remote learning, so where there's no access to connectivity or where there's no access to computers and we only have access to paper or radio or television, and where the learning is not as personalized in different in other contexts. So that is also to consider. Also to consider our vulnerable populations, such as girls or at-risk boys, where you would want to consider where it would be more beneficial for them to continue learning remotely, or do they need to be in the classroom. At the same time, it will be important to also take a look at how ready the school is to welcome the students back, and whether the school has the capacity, not just physically, but also in terms of administration, to put in social distancing measures and to mitigate any risks. For instance, how large the classes, can they take some lessons outside, like Dr. Desai mentioned? And do the kids have to travel to and from school, where they are going to be on a crowded bus, which would be the case in Paris, for example? So putting together these horizontal and vertical dimensions, the idea is that countries will need to take a risk-benefit analysis, and that usually it will be on a case-by-case basis, or it will be very context-specific in deciding when to reopen schools. If you can move on to the next slides, please. And the guidelines that are given are along 6 dimensions. Governments will need to consider the policy dimensions and the financing dimensions, while they consider the dimensions of whether the operations to reopen will be safe, the benefits of various forms of learning, how to include the most marginalized students in the classroom, how to reach the most marginalized, and the well-being and protection services that they can provide. So for example, in some schools, children need to go to school to get their meals, as that's their only meal for the day. So all of these issues will need to be considered, and the guidelines provide information for governments to consider prior to reopening. It's not really a checklist that you will see in the framework. It's a list of questions that governments can ask before reopening, as they're considering reopening, and then when the schools are reopened, what to continue doing. So that is the basically, I hope everybody got to see that slide. That is basically the framework. I have 2 minutes, so I think I've run out of my time. What's important is, in addition to the framework, is that we see how to implement the framework, and that is the purpose of the next presenter, who will come in to explain how governments are implementing the schools reopening on the ground. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer questions later.
Thank you very much, Sonia, for introducing us with the framework for school reopening. I now invite David Bazongo of Burkina Faso for sharing with us some of the perspective from the educational planning viewpoint. He is going to speak in French, but his slides are in English. David, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Merci, vous pouvez afficher mes slides. OK, merci. La présentation ici, l'objectif, c'est vraiment de mettre l'accent sur l'implication majeure de la fermeture pour le planificateur. Lorsqu'on considère un planificateur d'éducation, lorsqu'on ferme les classes, quelle est l'implication? Et on va parler justement des phases critiques de la réouverture, également du cadre de réouverture des écoles qui a été produit par l'UNICEF et l'UNESCO et également les autres partenaires. Mais avant, on voudrait juste faire une petite introduction sur ce que le planificateur fait au sein d'un ministère de l'Éducation. Alors, je vois que l'affichage pose problème, mais je vais poursuivre parce qu'on n'a pas suffisamment de temps. Quelles sont les missions principales d'un planificateur?
Please, Binyam, next slide. Oh, Binyam, or did you see it? I don't know. Yeah, thank you.
OK.
Oui, c'est bon. Continue, merci.
OK. Voilà. Donc, quelles sont les missions principales d'un planificateur d'éducation? J'ai juste retenu 3 missions principales. La première mission est que c'est lui qui élabore l'ensemble des documents de planification. La politique éducative qui peut aller à 10 ans, également les documents de mise en œuvre, notamment les plans d'action sur le moyen terme 3 ans, tous les documents annuels sont élaborés par le planificateur avant d'être soumis aux autorités et aussi à l'ensemble de la communauté éducative. Donc, son rôle est très important à ce niveau. Le second rôle qu'il joue, c'est vraiment la collecte des données statistiques pour pouvoir produire les documents qu'il élabore. Et c'est pour cette raison les recensements annuels des élèves, des établissements, du personnel enseignant sont conduits par le planificateur. Également, la question des technologies de l'information et de la communication. Comme vous le savez, pour élaborer un document aujourd'hui, il faut avoir des bases de données et l'ensemble de ces questions-là sont traitées par des informaticiens. Il est possible que le planificateur de l'éducation ne soit pas un statisticien ou encore un informaticien attitré, mais il a toujours ce personnel en son sein qui font ce travail-là. Voilà un peu le rôle d'un planificateur au niveau d'un système éducatif. À présent, lorsque les classes sont fermées, quelle est l'implication de la fermeture pour le planificateur? Il faut dire dans un premier temps que lorsque les classes sont fermées, on met à plat l'ensemble de la programmation du planificateur. Il avait prévu des cibles en fin d'année, les écoles sont fermées, beaucoup d'élèves n'iront pas à l'école, du coup, l'ensemble de ces indicateurs vont prendre un coup. Les dépenses également qu'il avait programmées vont prendre un coup, et à ce niveau-là, il faut une révision qui va tenir compte de l'ampleur de la situation, mais également qui va tenir compte de la durée. Et la deuxième situation, l'implication majeure d'ailleurs, c'est toutes les questions qui lui viennent. On a donc, dans un premier temps, au niveau du sommet du ministère, vous avez le ministre lui-même qui est appelé par l'Assemblée nationale, qui est appelé par le gouvernement pour lui donner une situation claire de la question. Et là, on va lui demander quels sont donc les effectifs des écoles, quels sont donc le nombre d'écoles qui sont fermées, quels sont les niveaux qui sont concernés, est-ce qu'on a une durée prévisionnelle de tout cela, également est-ce qu'il y a des mesures internes que le ministre a prises. Et ça, c'est important, parce que le gouvernement déjà va dire il faut que vous preniez des mesures avec les ressources que vous avez. Et ça, c'est important que le planificateur ait déjà les réponses à ces questions-là. Et l'autre élément, c'est ceux qui sont sur le même niveau que le planificateur, notamment le financier et également le gestionnaire des ressources humaines. Eux, à leur niveau, il y a d'abord le respect des textes et le respect également de la gestion des ressources humaines et de la gestion financière. Et lorsque le planificateur est dans une situation de fermeture d'école, ça nécessite quelquefois une révision de l'ensemble des procédures pour qu'on puisse aller de l'avant, mais il est obligé de répondre aux questions de financiers et aussi de gestion des ressources humaines. On prend un exemple, des écoles sont fermées, il faut donc recourir à des temps pour ouvrir d'autres écoles ailleurs, mais le financier dira simplement que ce n'est pas possible parce que lui, à son niveau, il n'a pas prévu ça. Et la grosse question vient du personnel enseignant et aussi de l'encadrement. Eux, ils veulent savoir, lorsque les classes sont fermées, les stagiaires des écoles, qu'est-ce qu'ils font? Également, en ce qui concerne le paiement des vacataires au niveau des établissements privés, comment ça va se passer? Il y a toutes ces questions que le planificateur se doit de répondre. Mais à ce niveau-là, on peut donc se poser la question, est-ce qu'il y a justement des étapes assez critiques? L'étape critique, c'est avant l'ouverture même des classes. Parce que le planificateur, il fait le chemin pour tous les autres. Et donc, avant l'ouverture, il faut que le planificateur ait des éléments clés pour pouvoir donc aider les autres. Et à ce niveau-là, le premier élément, c'est pouvoir réviser ces cibles. Et pour réviser les cibles, il faut que les cibles déjà programmées soient désagrégées. Et si ce n'est pas désagrégé, il ne peut pas le faire. Par exemple, si on ne connaît pas dans la région quel est le taux brut d'admission qu'on a pour cible, lorsque la région est confrontée à un problème, on ne sait pas comment réviser la cible nationale. Donc ça, c'est vraiment un élément clé qui intervient comme étant une phase critique. Le deuxième élément, c'est la collecte des données. Nos données sont collectées de façon classique. On est toujours dans la situation où on envoie des documents papier. Et quand il y a une situation de crise qui se pose, les enseignants ne sont pas sur place, comment collecter l'information? Donc, il faut aller vers une collecte d'informations basée sur les technologies de l'information et de la communication. Et le troisième élément, c'est vraiment les connaissances dans d'autres domaines, comme les ressources humaines, les finances. Lorsque le planificateur n'a pas ces éléments-là, ça va lui poser problème pour pouvoir donc arriver à régler la situation. En ce qui concerne le cas de l'ouverture des écoles qui a été proposé par l'UNESCO avec les autres partenaires, je dis que c'est un très bon document pour le planifier l'éducation. Parce qu'il a quelque chose en main pour discuter, échanger avec les autorités pour pouvoir les convaincre sur les éléments clés qu'il faut considérer avant d'ouvrir donc les classes. Et là, c'est assez détaillé, c'est assez clair et c'est synthétique. Ça lui permet donc d'argumenter en faveur donc de leur ouverture en toute connaissance de cause. Et qu'est-ce que l'UNESCO peut faire en plus? Pour moi, un des sentiers clés, c'est les outils. Il doit revoir les outils de planification, également utiliser les TIC et mettre l'accent sur la formation. Je pense que je suis déjà presque à la fin de mon heure, mais je voulais insister sur la planification des agrégés. Aujourd'hui, l'UNESCO doit...
Oui. C'est juste que la présentation est un peu en retard, donc pour que j'ai demandé qu'on avance un peu pour que tout le monde puisse suivre. Comme tu arrives sur la conclusion, que ce soit clair pour tout le monde.
OK.
Next slide, please. Ça y est, je te laisse continuer. Next slide, please.
The last slide is...
Moi, je n'arrive pas à voir ça ici, en fait. OK. Donc, pour dire simplement que ce qui est important pour l'UNESCO aujourd'hui, c'est d'évoluer vers la conception des outils et des documents pour aider les différents ministères à bien collecter l'information à temps. Donc, en utilisant les nouvelles technologies, parce que nous savons qu'on ne peut plus collecter l'information auprès des enseignants uniquement sur des papiers. Et les ministères ont besoin d'être appuyés pour le faire. Et il y a 2 collectes qui sont faites par l'UNESCO au cours de la période écoulée, mais pratiquement les taux de réponse ne sont pas bons. Le deuxième élément, c'était vraiment la planification désagrégée et dynamique. Tant que dans la planification du ministère, on ne saura pas les cibles par région ou par entité administrative, on ne pourra jamais faire une bonne révision. Ce n'est pas possible. Et ça, l'UNESCO doit pouvoir aider les ministères parce qu'il faut une connaissance en informatique, il faut une connaissance assez poussée dans certains logiciels de gestion. Et le dernier élément, c'est vraiment la formation des planificateurs. Comme je l'ai dit, un planificateur qui n'a pas de notion sur les marchés publics et la finance publique ne peut pas réussir une bonne révision. Parce que tout de suite, on va lui dire que ce qu'il propose est contre l'ensemble des procédures. Mais s'il connaît les procédures, il va proposer en conséquence ce qu'il a à proposer pour que ça puisse passer au niveau du planificateur. Donc voilà en gros les éléments que j'avais en introduction pour que nous puissions échanger là-dessus. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, David. So thank you very much once again, and for all the points that you have raised regarding from the perspective of the planner. That was very helpful. So now we will quickly move to our colleague Peter Wallet of TTF, UNESCO TTF, Teacher Task Force, to introduce us a new guideline which is being developed for teachers and school reopening. Peter, you are welcome, and 10 minutes, please. Over to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon to all colleagues. Can you put the presentation up?
Henok, can we have the presentation, the slides? Yes, it's coming now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity for me to represent the Teacher Task Force. We have 3 main pillars, and that is to advocate for teachers to share knowledge around teachers in the teaching profession and to support countries. So this latest output by the Teacher Task Force therefore fulfills all 3 of those pillars. So we're happy to have worked actually with UNESCO, and also it wasn't mentioned before, but this is a collaboration not just between the Teacher Task Force and UNESCO, but also with the International Labour Organization. So thank you very much to colleagues of that entity in the support of this work. Next slide, please. Again, thank you. So we know that the timing for reopening of schools needs to be guided by whole school populations, but of course the preparedness of the education system and teachers and overall health considerations. So it needs to be timing is very critical and key in this regard. needs to be measured or assessed on benefits and risks, cross-sectoral, context-specific evidence for education, but also public health considerations and social and economic factors all need to be considered by policymakers and decision makers. The governments, of course, will need to be very active in terms of having an ongoing policy dialogue with partners in the education system and cross-sectorally, and they'll need to communicate their national plans and protocols. Once this has been somewhat accomplished or during the process, central authorities should be decentralizing decision-making to local authorities so they can respond appropriately given local needs and regional needs and priorities, as well as looking at the school plans and as there are differences between educational levels and regions. Next slide, please. So this is just quickly to say that this is work that is contextualized also within the greater framework of reopening schools that was mentioned by Sonia before, and also the WHO considerations on public health measures. This document actually began as a longer document that was looking not only at decisions and elements related to central authorities and policymakers, but also in terms of school leaders and how school leaders should act appropriately. The decision was taken that 2 documents, in fact, would be released as based on the volume and scope of what we were trying to originally accomplish. So this document will be supplemented within probably in about two weeks, maybe 3 weeks, I'm hoping, no longer than that. There will be a separate document that is specifically tailored to the needs of school leaders and how school leaders can respond to the reopening of schools. It'll be in the form of a toolkit, so it'll be something that's practical and teachers and school leaders can implement in the schools themselves. Next slide, please. So the Back to School framework covers what we saw were 7 main elements, those being the social dialogue and communication aspect, followed by health and safety and health. There's, of course, the very critical idea of teachers' psychological, emotional well-being, which needs to be taken care of. There is the issue of teacher preparation and learning in this new era. Of course, we need to think about deployment patterns, deployment strategies, but also teachers' rights and working conditions. And lastly, the final 2 items are about financial resources investing. How do we reinvest in teachers in this process? And finally, monitoring and evaluation, which is critical throughout. So just quickly, just to go through a few maybe major points about the guidelines. So in each of them. So social dialogue and communication. We want to make sure that teachers, education support staff, and teachers representatives, they're consulted in the decision making and planning. So they're included in the timing and the processes and procedures and protocols for the reopening of schools. It's critical that women are also well represented. There's also a need to prioritize the communication dialogue between teachers and school leaders, the communities, parents and learners, so sort of a macro level kind of perspective on this. In terms of safety and health, there's an adherence, of course, is important for the WHO guidelines on and other international organizations on the return to school. And it's important that policymakers are considering about how to prevent infection and provide PEPs and personal protective equipment. Next slide, please. This is quite a new. It's such an interesting moment, and there needs to be some consideration of teachers' psychological and social emotional well-being. So given the critical health issues, the guidelines call for prioritization of the psychological support to teachers over in terms of over their academic obligations at this moment. So So the return to school would have a reprioritization of psychological well-being as the first consideration, and of course before that health. But of course we need to think about that teachers need to be resourced, schools need to be resourced. Are they receiving the support they need? And also how do we train school leaders in terms of helping to build psychological support for the teaching workforce? It needs to also include protecting vulnerable and at-risk groups. We know that with advancing age and health conditions, we know that there are increased risk for infection. So it considers the protection of vulnerable and at-risk groups in the guidelines, and of course combating discrimination and stigmatization as the infection has been related to some stigmatization of some groups. There's a very key element, of course, is the teacher preparation and learning. Distance education has taken over in so many countries and so many contexts. Although, of course, this leaves us with a huge digital divide where education is not continuing as normal and has stopped altogether in many contexts. So the teacher preparation and the learning aspects is key. So teachers need to be involved in also the adjusting of curriculum and the reassessment, given new timelines and school calendars on the return to school. It needs to also continuously consider the key role of teachers in instruction and teaching, and that teachers are leading and they have the expertise to play a key role there. We need to train teachers for emergency responses, innovative alternative solutions. There increased use of distance education, emergency measures, use of flipped classrooms, blended learning, where some students will be remaining in the home, so teachers will have split time devoted to, in many cases, online learning and back to face-to-face instruction. It also talks about the postponement or the adaptation of teacher performance evaluation. And as a final element, it calls for peer support learning and communities of practice, both face-to-face traditional and, of course, also online technologies. In terms of deployments, rights, and working conditions,
Two more minutes, Peter. 2 more minutes, please.
Thank you. The guideline calls to ensure that that there are enough teachers. Teachers may be lost in the process of the return to school. Rural teachers going back to urban environments. There may be certain considerations about health, and there is the possibility of losing teachers along the way. So there is a need to ensure that teachers, sufficient numbers of teachers are available, and as well as the education support staff. There's an important need to preserve teachers' rights and status, and that includes benefits such as time off or taking care of sick relatives. So there's a lot of concerns about teachers' rights and status. The salaries need to be maintained. We need to protect the rights of contract teachers. Flexible scheduling policies and plans will be required, given the distance and physical distance measures that are in place. There will be divisions of classrooms, and perhaps there might be increased double shifting. So for many health concerns, there will be this issue to consider. Of course, you need to support teachers and education staff with family responsibilities, of course, as well. In terms of financial resources and investments, the guidelines call to assess the impact of the crisis on education budgets and to adjust accordingly. It talks about resisting practices detrimental to the teaching profession, such as longer working hours or the increase of teaching of hiring less than qualified teachers. It talks about investing in teachers and education support staff, but also in terms of school infrastructure and the needed equipment or health equipment related to providing a safe classroom. Finally, the last slide, please. monitoring and evaluation will be key. It will be important throughout to continually assess health risks and protective factors during the return to school. It will be important throughout the process at the beginning and at every stage to collect disaggregated data on the learning needs of vulnerable groups, including teachers, but including, of course, sex disaggregated data, and of course, disaggregated along other lines in terms of displaced populations, disabled, and different minority groups. Finally, it will be important to develop and implement systems to monitor teachers' situation using available systems, including EMIS and TMIS. And that is a basic overview of the guidelines. There's the link there where you can see, so they can be downloaded and used. And we would like to obviously take this moment to encourage partners and other members to spread information about the guidelines and to promote their usage. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Peter, for introducing us in this very important and crucial guideline. That will come very handy when during the opening of schools. I now want to move quickly to Angela to briefly tell us what additional tools we have in connection to school reopening. Angela and
Binyam?
Valerie. Yes?
Binyam, yes, please. I see that we are almost 2 o'clock in Paris time and maybe later in Addis. And our speaker from WHO will be leaving. If you agree, and Mamadou Lamine too, we could start with the question and answer. And our presentation together with Angela can come later. At the end of the Q&A.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you, Valerie. Thank you.
No, do you agree with that proposal?
Hold on, Lamin. Yes, I think that's a reasonable proposal. We can put the other tools with the wrap-up intervention, yes, where you will be talking. So let me see if Lamin could tell us one or two major questions that you have for Dr. Desai before she leaves. Lamin, over to you. Thank you, Valerie.
Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues. So reflecting on the presentation that we have just heard, I would like us to focus on the processes and also the actors, but also the tools that are needed for key interventions, by UNESCO in assisting our member states, to cope with this COVID-19. And I would like us to have our responses in the dialogue box directly to avoid, duplication. But also we will make sure to recap all the recurrent, questions from different people on the different presentations that we just followed, so that we can help organize, this session. We have 20 minutes to do that. We want people to be very concise and go straight to the point. So basically at this point, I don't know if people have some comments, questions, to ask to the three panelists, especially to Peter.
Lamin, can I interrupt you?
Good efforts.
Lamin, excuse me. Do we have, because Dr. Desai will be leaving us in 5-10 minutes, can you please tell us if there is one or two questions that could be responded by Dr. Desai first, and then we move to the other ones? Is there in the chat box a question for Dr. Desai before she leaves?
I put one on the immunity passport. I put it in the chat long ago. If we could, yeah.
Can you probably say it while Lamin is looking for one more?
Yes.
Do you mind if I share my screen again? I just think that my graphic might make it a little bit easier to
Yes.
understand. I just have to find it. Hold on just one second. It should be right here. Sorry. Global update.
In the meantime, probably, Shalin, can I ask? I know you have been responding to some of the questions on the chat box.
Yeah, I've
Can you
tried.
probably, can you probably brief us on the immunity passport and some of the questions that we raised? I know you have to leave very soon.
Yeah, I'm just trying to share my screen because that, I think, for whatever reason, it's not showing up here. Anyways, I'll explain it. So immunity passports, the challenge with immunity passports is that they aren't as straightforward as they seem. Let me see if I can. I'm really sorry. I had the slide up. Oh, here we go. Let's see if that works. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see now.
Yeah,
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through this really quickly. So across the x-axis, you have incubation period, so the amount of time that it takes before the virus starts to replicate, which is shown here, and the amount of time it takes before you end up with any symptoms, which is here. So what happens is once an individual is infected, it takes some time for that virus to replicate. Once the virus has replicated enough to cause symptoms, sorry, I apparently have other, anyways, once somebody has symptoms, the body has already started to react, but what you really need is to be able to see antibodies, and those take time to generate. And there's two different kinds of antibodies. So there's the early antibodies, which are the IgM antibodies, and there are the late antibodies, which are the IgG antibodies, which are here in the purple. The important thing to understand is that first of all, depending on when you test an individual, for example, if you were to test here right at the beginning of symptom onset, you may not get a positive result on your serology test, even though somebody has and is in the process of developing immunity. The second thing to understand is that while we know that people, after they have had the virus and successfully fought it, we know that they have antibodies. What we don't understand is how long those antibodies are present for and how good those antibodies are. So they may be present, but if they're only present for a month, then you can understand that an immunity passport, it's only valid from a month, for a month from when you would have had your symptoms. Alternatively, if those antibodies aren't good enough to fight off a second infection, then knowing that you have antibodies isn't as helpful. And so in this, we're in the process of doing studies and trying to figure this out. But one of the comments in the chat box was also like, how is it possible that we don't understand the immunity yet? Well, if we think back to end of December, many of us didn't know what COVID was. And yes, there have been many people who have had the disease and recovered, but it's taken us time to create tests. And then you have to go and you have to test them periodically to understand how long those antibodies last for. And there's other testing that you have to do to understand how well they function or they don't. So all of that work is underway. So it's not to say that we'll never have an answer to how many antibodies and how good are they. It's just today, right now, we don't have those answers. So can I just make sure that that was okay?
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Another question from another question from Yumiko along the same line on the likelihood of, ages from 3 to 8 not only getting the disease, but also transmitting it, and how is that going to affect the classroom dynamics, provided there will be both children and teachers in the same setting?
So if I've understood the question correctly, it's around transmission. And like we talked about, what we expect is that most people who get the infection will go on to infect 2 to 3 other people. So that's what the transmission dynamic is. We don't fully understand how that transmission occurs. We know from the few studies that exist in school settings that it's not the classroom that typically leads to transmission. It's typically other social activities that leads to transmission. We also know from those few studies, and again, it's only a few studies, right? So we're still in the process of learning from other studies that are being done and from other countries that have already started the process of reopening. We're in the process of learning how that transmission occurs. Children are less likely to transmit. One of the papers that I have on the bottom of that slide that I showed was a child who became infected from an adult. They did contact tracing. This was in France. They did contact tracing on 140 individuals. He was not in a classroom setting, but he did go to a ski school and he went to a restaurant. And he went to a number of other sort of social events. 140 people were contact traced. None of those people, as a result of exposure to that child, ended up with COVID. So we're still learning how to do all of this and to understand how transmission works and what role children play. Sorry, I wish I had something more concrete and definitive, but I don't.
Thank you, Shalini. I think you have answered the main questions, and we can move on to the next.
Thanks very much. I'm going to sign off now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Shalini.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Hello?
Lamin?
Yes.
Lamin, can you share with us some more questions, 3 to 4 questions for others, please?
Actually, for the subsequent presenters, there are no questions on the dialogue box. So I want to open the floor, to colleagues if they have questions for the others, especially for Peter, that presented, on support for teachers in back-to-school efforts. So the floor is open. Do anybody wants to ask question to the other presenters, especially to Peter? Colleagues, you have the floor because, as you know, the school reopening will have a lot of consequences on teachers, both morally and also the pandemic has affected the income of teachers, especially those teaching at some private, religious or community schools, but also their motivation, including non-monetary incentives that some of them had to lose during this pandemic, but also the knowledge, their health and well-being. So anything that you have been reflecting, considering Peter made that you would like to share questions. Yeah.
May I come in? This is Yumiko. I'd like to thank the presenters for excellent presentations. And I was really impressed with what the TTF is doing global. And maybe it's not quite the question, but the comment. But the draft guideline for teachers from UNESCO TTF. I think this is an excellent starting point. And as you said, Lamin, that schools in Africa are very, very, have a lot of variety. As you said, we have a small religious schools, and then a large government schools, and also the private schools and the boarding schools. So I think we have to adapt this guideline into the situation. And then that's something that we should look at very carefully. Even in the same country, the situations are very different. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yumiko. Yeah.
Yeah, Lamin.
Valerie, yes.
Yeah, just want to maybe to underline that this is TTF and UNESCO. UNESCO TEDS is also working on that. So I think it is important to see it like that. Secondly, I had maybe a question for David Bazongo. I will put it in English and then, if needed, translate it. David's presentation was very insightful. The purpose was to see how the school reopening framework developed together with UNICEF and the World Bank can be useful for a planner who is looking at teachers' issues. And David, in your presentation, it wasn't clear if it is about teachers in which are civil servants, or does it also involve? Does it also take into account teachers in the private sector? Or, as Yumiko said, those which are working in non-formal, private sector. Yeah, if how would that take into account private sector teachers? Because
thank you, Valerie.
Yeah.
So, David, you have the floor to respond to these questions.
Merci. Alors, comme je l'ai dit,
c'est pour voir dans ta présentation comment le planificateur prend en compte tous les besoins d'enseignants, primaires, formels et pas formels, formels, non formels et privés, publics. Et qu'est-ce que ça implique?
Oui, les écoles religieuses aussi et les écoles communautaires.
Oui, justement, la question principale que le planificateur se pose lorsqu'il veut élaborer justement un document de ce genre, c'est d'avoir la totalité des enseignants. En général, pour les enseignants du public à tous les niveaux, c'est plus simple, mais pour les enseignants du privé, quelquefois c'est difficile parce que dans un premier temps, beaucoup ne sont pas permanents et comme vous le savez, beaucoup d'enseignants au niveau du privé, ce sont des vacataires. Donc, il vient, il fait juste 2 heures et il repart. Pour donc pouvoir faire la cartographie, c'est un peu plus compliqué. C'est la même chose également parce que les responsables d'établissements privés, beaucoup d'entre eux ne respectent pas les cahiers de charges parce que dans le cahier de charges, il y a un certain nombre d'enseignants qu'il faut avoir comme permanents. Comme ils ne le font pas, lorsque vous partez collecter l'information, vous avez encore des enjeux ou encore des défis plus grands qu'au niveau du public, là où c'est un peu plus simple. Mais pour l'élaboration des documents, on prend en charge le tout, seulement c'est le statut de l'enseignant et quelquefois son emploi qui peut permettre de différencier et d'avoir une situation exhaustive. C'est la même chose pour l'éducation non formelle. Et comme vous le savez, l'éducation non formelle utilise beaucoup de personnel hors du système, des professionnels qui interviennent. Et là, la collecte des données prend en compte le tout. Mais il faut arriver à faire la différence au niveau du statut pour avoir une situation qui ne va pas biaiser l'information que nous avons. Et donc, quand on est dans une situation d'ouverture d'école de ce genre-là, il faut arriver dans la collecte de l'information pour préparer la l'ouverture des écoles. Il faut collecter l'information en tenant compte du statut de chaque personnel et du statut des établissements. Et je dis que l'enjeu majeur, c'est vraiment le privé, et le privé quelquefois confessionnel, là où il y a des difficultés. Donc voilà un peu. Et quand on prend le document que déjà l'UNESCO a élaboré, on voit un certain nombre d'éléments dedans qui peuvent permettre aux planificateurs, quand ils l'utilisent, de ne pas oublier un seul maillon du système au niveau donc des enseignants. Et c'est ça qui est vraiment important, ce qui a été proposé.
Merci beaucoup, David. Valerie, do you want to translate that or something before we move on very quickly?
I'll do my best, but I had an additional question, because the fear we have is that with the school closure, many private schools may have terminated the contract of their teachers. And for reopening school, we thought that the planners would need to have information on the need for teachers. That's why. David said that, yes, indeed, education planners are supposed to collect data on all teachers in private school, in public school, in non-formal schools, but in reality, it's quite difficult. These are always a challenge. But David was saying that the framework developed by UNESCO, UNICEF, and the World Bank is helpful because it provides a kind of checklist so that planners don't forget to take into account those teachers, which they normally are not always taking into account because of lack of data. That's what I...
Thank you very much, Valerie. I think this is a fair recap of what David has said. I don't know if other colleagues have questions for the different presenters before.
You have a question in the chat as well.
Lamin, can I come in, please?
Yes.
This is
okay.
Binyam. Yeah, I think
Okay,
we're running a bit out of
Yes.
time. We're running a bit out of time, and please, can we just wrap up the session and move to the last session, because there is a presentation, another webinar, which is starting at 4 p.m.
Yeah, Binyam,
So, yes,
maybe one important question that was raised by Ismail, I think that many colleagues will want, because is what is the difference between the two frameworks which were presented? May I say something about that before we move to the next question?
And then, yes.
Yeah, I think it is a key question. The first framework that we developed together with UNICEF and World Bank is a broad framework for school reopening. The teachers aspect is not fully explored. This is why UNESCO and the TTF decided to have a framework which is really focusing on the teachers aspects of school reopening. So the second presentation by Peter is complementary to the one that David Bazongo did together with Sonia. I hope this clarifies the situation.
Thank you, Valerie. Lamin, can we finish the session here and move to the next one, please? That's
there was
good.
another important question, but if you don't have time, okay. Otherwise, Victoria was asking, about the guidelines. If guidelines have been already piloted anywhere. The question is for Peter.
Thank you so much, Lamin.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for leading this session and for moderating the question and answer session. I'm sorry for being for interrupting, but I think some of the questions were also responded in the chat, and I hope we will continue to do that. So as a last session of this webinar, we will hear very briefly from Angela on some of the other available tools in relation to teachers and school reopening. And then Valerie will also come in following Angela for some wrap up and some intervention strategies. Angela and Valerie, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Yes, please just rapidly an introduction. What Angela will be presenting is the purpose of the session today was to look at what we have in our pockets to address the school reopening. You have seen two presentations. Now Angela will briefly show other tools that we have, and then we can have a quick discussion of what is missing and what could be interesting to do together. Angela, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Valerie. As you said, these are additional resources that in a way complement and might create some discussion for gaps that we have in terms of resources, publications. In this first slide, you can see the framework for reopening of schools that was already presented, and supporting teachers in back to school efforts that was developed by TTF and UNESCO, of course. There are two additional documents on preparing the reopening to schools. One is called COVID-19 Education Response, Preparing the Reopening of Schools, which was developed by the Education Policy section. It includes information and data on the school closures, and which countries are reopening at the global level. It provides some examples and experiences. For Africa, as far as I remember, there was only Madagascar at the time when the document was developed, which I think was April. Then there is the issue note on school reopening, again developed by the Education Policy section together with the IEP and with the support of Abuja, Bangkok and Santiago offices. This issue note provides some additional insights on school reopening, best practices and lessons learned from previous crises that can be compared to the current one. Next slide. So these were resources that were developed in these last few weeks, I would say, that are mainly focusing on the COVID-19 crisis. These are resources that were developed, let's say, in the last 10 years for other emergencies, other contexts, but I think can inspire some reflection and can complement the most recent resources on COVID-19. There is the School Safety Manual Tools for Teachers, which was developed by ICBA in 2017 and mainly focuses on China. And I believe it's interesting because it provides an introduction for teachers that want to develop a school safety manual. It covers a variety of topics, going from preventing violent extremism to health. But I believe it can be a good methodology also to develop a school safety manual in the context of COVID-19. Another interesting tool is Play and Resilience, a toolkit for teachers, caregivers, and other stakeholders. Again, this one was developed for post-conflict situations and natural disasters context. In this case, again, the idea is to provide teachers and caregivers with tools to promote young children resilience. And we saw before that the psychological aspect is very important, not only for teachers, but also for children. Another tool is Skills for Life. This one was developed, Skills for Life Plus, was developed by Juba office in 2013. Of course, it mainly focuses on South Sudan. So it's a very concrete example of an emergency context, and it provides teachers with information and practical methodologies to teach children and youth to make things out of very common materials and technologies in contexts where it's needed to be operational and to create tools out of nothing, basically. So this is also and for example, in this case, the toolkit teaches how to make water healthier. So this kind of experiences can be very helpful, not only for the teacher that provides skills, but also for children that learn elements of physics, mathematics with the teacher. And finally, there is the guidebook for planning education in emergencies and reconstruction. Again, this was developed for situations of post-conflict and disaster, but again, can be a tool that can inspire the planner and complement the most recent resources that are, of course, focusing more on the COVID-19 situation. Thank you, and over to you, if you have questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Angela. Very, very interesting. Binyam, should we move to the wrap-up now?
Yes, Valerie, can you do the wrap-up and the intervention strategy in 5 minutes, if possible?
Is it possible? Just say a few words, Valerie?
No, please, I will have questions for you during those 5 minutes. So after I finish, you can say a few words and ask your question, okay?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. It was Victoria. Is it Victoria? Okay. So rapidly, we are running out of time. Unfortunately, the purpose of the workshop was to be on the same page, to have the same understanding of what exists, but also to agree on what is missing. From the different presentations, I have understood that what is missing is support for collecting data on teachers. It was clear from David's presentation that we may have all the tools we want. If planners and ministries of education don't have up-to-date data on teachers, it will be a challenge. So it is clear that we need to think of what we could do in that area. In what Angela just presented, it is clear that for school reopening, we have a global framework, a teacher's framework, and other tools. But when it comes to school safety, play and resilience, or well-being, children well-being and teachers well-being, we don't have any update tools. So we may think that it is important for us to work on that. I would like to hear from you. We don't have much time, but it is important that to hear from you, so that we leave this meeting with a clear understanding of what is the work that we can do. I will give the floor to the colleague who wanted to talk previously. Who was it?
Hello, Valerie. This is Anne.
Yes. Oh, sorry, Anne. I didn't recognize you.
It's okay. It's okay. You are doing your job. I think it's good. It's just that I want to appreciate the presentations and the questions. I find it very interesting, but I've been struggling here all along because this is a basic question I'm asking myself. Reopening, yes, we have to think about it, but we shouldn't rush it. We have just seen in France what happened. As soon as it was open, within a week, they started recording increase in cases. And given the situation in Africa, yes, let's continue to plan for it, like is being said. Let's continue to think about it, but really, let's not rush it, because the context in Africa is completely different from the rest of the world. And if really we must think of reopening, we have to also think of an innovative way of doing it, so that coupled with means of using other ways of teaching and learning, in a situation where we have overcrowding, the school should really begin to look at maybe 2 days a week for a section of its student population and teachers while they do blended learning. I am really thinking that in Africa, the approach has to be very innovative and use multiple kind of means to ensure that we do not just open the doors, because it would spell disaster and doom in Africa, given the nature of overcrowdedness. I give an example of schools I've visited in the camps, where it's almost like kids are sitting on top of each other. So really, this is all I have to say. It's not to put a damper to it, but I would really want to go back to the planning stages, to looking at the data, and to really devise innovative ways using blended learning. And this is the reason why we are pushing for the e-learning strategy in Africa, so that it can kick in very quickly and not really rush like the rest of the world to talk about just reopening. Reopening, yes, but let it be on the long finger. Thank you.
Thank you. This is really relevant, and yeah, we have to build on the realities, the context of crowdedness of schools, classrooms. It's true, it is a challenge. Thank you very much, Antares, for this insight. Other colleagues have anything to say before Binyam closes the door?
Thank you, Valerie. It seems there aren't many more questions. I'm sure there are a lot of thoughts.
This is really...
okay. Yeah. Thank you very much, Valerie, for reminding us, not only on what we do have, but also what is missing and some of the things that we collaboratively have to work on. And it's welcome, Antares. It's always a pleasure. We didn't know that you were around. It's always a pleasure to hear your insights and your inputs, and we take note of your also, that we have to go about this very cautiously. Thank you very much, and thanks again for joining us. So thank you very much, colleagues. We're now wrapping up and finalizing. I would just like to give the floor to Saliu, just in 1 or 2 minutes, just to share with us 2-3 points, and also by way of the way forward. Saliu, 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Binyam. I think I can do that even in 1 minute, since we're running out of time. I would just like to thank TTF and TED for involving IGBA in this very important webinar, aiming at preparing school reopening. I would like to thank also all representatives from UNESCO field offices for their active participation, and special thanks to our director, Antares, for her insightful remarks. I think those remarks could be, will be considered for the way forward. Also, I would like to thank the WHO and especially Dr. Desai for her insightful presentation. IGBA expresses its availability to help reach the objective of the webinar toward a successful, smooth, and adapted. And I insist on that, smooth and adapted. As Anne said it, we don't have to rush toward the reopening, and we have to adapt the reopening according to the realities of the different areas. I do hope that we'll be able to take ownership of the tools developed by UNESCO, and some of them have been presented by Angela, and probably they will be shared and feedback is needed to improve them. We also hope that we'll have a good use of the platform that UNESCO has created, and that platform will help us to exchange our practices, our best practices, and all the resources that are made available. And also, we'll be able to fully support national preparation and guide implementation processes, okay, for a smooth and adapted school reopening. I think that is all from me, and we look forward for a better cooperation between all the entities to help national countries, to help countries develop their national program. Thank you very much, Binyam.
Thank you so much, Saliu, for nice concluding remarks. I also would like to thank everyone, the two of our directors, Yumiko and Antares, for your guidance and for attending the session. Valerie and Sonia, Saliu, we have been organizing this for a while, and thank you very much. I also would like to thank Lemon for leading the question and answer session. Thank you all colleagues for your participation. Just before we end, I would like to remind you of the questionnaire that we sent during the first knowledge sharing interview about 4 weeks ago. We still would be very, very happy to receive the updates, and we would really appreciate it if you could send us the responses to that questionnaire. And thank you for everyone for your active participation. I'm sorry if I have been rushing the process and some of the sessions. This is because in 25 minutes we have another webinar starting, and I want to make sure that some of our colleagues have some time off the screen. So thank you again, everyone, and we hope to see you in the third virtual knowledge sharing meeting in a few weeks' time. Thank you so much once again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Stay safe.
Bye-bye. Yumiko is here. Oh, Yumiko, you are here. Thank you, Yumiko. I thought you had left. Thank you.
And see you at the next webinar, which is happening in 20 minutes.
Thank you, Saliu. Thank you, Valerie.
Albert, how are you?
Hi.
That's